Imagine yourself standing in the middle of a medieval winter. Before you lies a frozen lake, flat, white, and still, silent to the point of feeling almost sacred. No wind, no birdsong, no sign of danger at all. But just one wrong step, and that sheet of ice could swallow you within seconds, without warning, without giving you a chance to correct your mistake. The most terrifying part is this: you would not know what was about to happen until it was already too late. Today, we have measuring devices, warning systems, scientific knowledge, but medieval people did not. They had no numbers, no safety standards. The only thing they carried with them when stepping onto the ice was their own body, and most importantly, their ears. Because in that world, sound was not just noise. Sound was a sign of life, and silence was sometimes the final warning. They called it dead ice. A kind of ice that looked no different from safe ice, but inside was already hollow, already weak, already ready to collapse without any loud cracking. The problem was this: dead ice did not always reveal itself. It did not speak. It did not respond. It simply lay there, silent, waiting for a human to step onto it. That was why medieval people relied on a test that was brutally simple: a sound test. It may sound primitive, but sometimes it was the thinnest possible line between making it home or never returning at all. For medieval people, winter was not just cold. It was a trial that lasted for months, where every small decision could leave consequences that could not be undone. Frozen rivers and white-covered lakes were not merely scenery. They were roads, sources of water, transport routes, and often the only shortcuts between villages when snow buried every dirt path. Not stepping onto the ice often meant being unable to continue everyday life at all. But stepping onto the ice was never safe. Ice is not stone. It is a living substance, changing day by day, hour by hour, shaped by wind, temperature, and cycles of melting and refreezing. Medieval people had no concept of a safe thickness. They knew only one simple truth: there was ice that could bear a human being, and there was ice that would betray you the moment you placed your trust in it. The danger lay in the fact that these two kinds of ice looked almost identical: the same gray-white color, the same smooth surface, the same biting cold seeping through the soles of the shoes. Human eyes could not tell the difference. Hands were no help either, and so the only experience they had left was to listen. Medieval people soon realized that living ice often produced sound. Not loud cracking, but deep, low rumbles that traveled far beneath the ice when weight was applied. The sound was not pleasant, but it brought a strange sense of reassurance. The ice was responding. It was still internally connected. By contrast, there were ice surfaces that were completely silent. No echo, no reverberation, just a suspicious muteness. And it was precisely that silence that began to frighten many people. From repeated observations, a habit formed. Before traveling far, people would stop, tap lightly on the ice, take a slow step, stop again, listen. Not everyone called it a test. It felt more like a ritual, a way to reassure themselves that they still had a choice, that they had not completely surrendered their lives to chance. But the problem was this: sound was not always honest. Strong winds could swallow faint vibrations. Thick snow could make ice sound softer than usual. Sled convoys that passed earlier could create a false sense of safety. And worst of all, humans often hear only what they want to hear. When they needed the ice to be safe, they were easily convinced that the sound was enough. Not everyone who stepped onto the ice was reckless. Merchants needed to shorten their routes to make it to market on time. Farmers had to cross rivers to tend their livestock. Children were sent to gather firewood, set fish traps, or carry water back to the village. In those circumstances, the sound test was not a perfect choice, but the only choice left. Class differences made everything harsher. The wealthy could wait, the poor could not. Those with horses, carts, and companions could afford to stop longer and listen. Someone traveling alone had to decide quickly. And when the cold seeped into the body, when time became pressure, caution gradually gave way to a fragile hope. Maybe this time it will be fine. The frightening thing is that in many cases, they were right. The ice held. The journey went smoothly. Experience was reinforced. Confidence grew. And it was precisely those safe crossings that made people less vigilant the next time. The sound test slowly shifted from a warning into a habit, from a habit into confidence. And from confidence, a small mistake began to take shape. Because there was a kind of ice that formed after irregular cycles of melting and refreezing that looked perfectly fine, made very little sound, and almost did not respond at all. Medieval people did not know its internal structure. They only knew one thing. When this kind of ice collapsed, it gave you no time to understand what was happening. And that was when everything began to slip beyond control. At first, nothing happened. The ice held. The first steps passed safely. Familiar sounds rose from beneath the ice, deep, low, steady. It was precisely that sound that pushed people forward. No one ran. No one panicked. Everything looked like it had hundreds of times before. And that very familiarity was the most dangerous bait of all. Then the sound began to change. Not cracking, no dramatic warning, just vibrations growing weaker, as if the ice itself were retreating into silence. A few people stopped. Others kept moving, believing they had gone too far to turn back. No one was certain of anything, but everyone understood that standing still too long in the middle of a lake was not a safe option either. The first moment was not when the ice broke, but when nothing could be heard anymore. The silence spread faster than fear. It made the heart pound, made the body tense. And in those few brief seconds, each person had to make their own decision, with no time to ask for advice, no chance to test again. The first person to fall did not scream. Not because he was calm, but because the freezing water stole his breath the moment his body touched it. Dead ice does not collapse with a loud crash like stone. It opens cleanly, neatly, swallowing a body whole, then closes again with a soft movement of water. Those who remained only had time to see a dark gap before the ice around it began to weaken. Human instinct is to rescue, but on ice, that instinct becomes the second deadly trap. One step forward to reach the victim, and the ice spreads open further. Another person slips in, then another. Not because they were foolish, but because they had no better option. Standing still meant the cold would numb the body. Moving meant triggering collapse. Dead ice does not need much weight. It only needs the wrong position. Below, black water moves slowly, pulling heat from the body second by second. Hands lose feeling. Legs no longer respond. The one who falls cannot grip. Those above dare not come closer. And the most terrifying part is this. From a distance, the scene produces almost no sound. Those who witnessed it later said that the most haunting thing was not cries for help, but their absence. No shouting, no chaos, just the ice surface becoming flat again, as if no one had ever existed there minutes before. It was precisely this false calm that led many others to walk into the same dead ice, completely unaware. The climax did not stop there. In some cases, the ice made a very loud sound before collapsing. The noise echoed and carried far, like living ice bearing weight. Old experience said this: ice that makes noise can still hold. And it was precisely that belief that led many people to keep moving forward, only to be betrayed in the very next second. Sound, the thing that had once saved lives, now became a false signal. In the medieval world, there was no concept of rescue, no specialized ropes, no thermal gear. Once dead ice opened, it meant the end came very quickly. Survivors were not always the strongest ones, but often the ones who happened to be standing farthest away when disaster began. And those who remained had to live on with the memory of that silence for the rest of their lives. Dead ice did not kill only because of its physical structure. It killed by deceiving experience. Every survival rule had once been correct in the past, until the day it was no longer true. And in that moment, there was no time to update the lesson. There were only consequences. If you place yourself in their position, in the middle of a frozen lake, with no tools, no modern knowledge, only your ears and a handful of past experiences, what would you trust? The sound you hear, or the silence you cannot understand? If you have your own thoughts about that moment between life and death, share them in the comments below. It is precisely these perspectives that make history feel alive. After everything that happened, people often want to believe that the sound test failed, that medieval people placed their trust in a crude, inaccurate method and paid for it with their lives. But when we look more closely at the records that remain, an uncomfortable truth gradually emerges. The problem was not the sound. The problem was how humans interpreted it. The sound test was never created as a tool that guaranteed absolute safety. It was not a promise that the ice would not collapse. It was only a signal, a fragile hint amid countless variables beyond human control. Medieval people understood this more clearly than we tend to assume. Many communities treated the absence of sound as a reminder to turn back, even when that meant missing an opportunity, enduring more cold, or being late for important work. Here is the twist. In many of the survival stories that were passed down, the ones who lived were not the best listeners, nor the ones who understood ice most deeply. They were the ones who chose to stop early, the ones willing to believe that uncertainty alone was reason enough to retreat. In other words, the sound test did not save lives through sound itself, but through the decisions people made after hearing it. Dead ice is dangerous, not because it is completely invisible, but because it creates a sense of familiarity. It makes people believe that simply repeating what worked before is enough. And when that belief is shattered, the natural human reaction is not doubt, but the urge to cling to old experience just a little longer. It is precisely in that moment of trying to hold on that disaster strikes. Seen from this perspective, the sound test is not proof of medieval backwardness. On the contrary, it shows how people tried to build a decision-making system under extremely limited conditions. Every survival rule they created was paid for with blood, with loss, with deaths that came without explanation. There were no experiments, no second attempts. Each winter was a brutal round of elimination. What makes the story heavier is the realization that even when the sound test was understood correctly, humans still could not fully control the outcome. Nature does not sign agreements with experience. It simply reacts in its own way. And medieval people, more than anyone else, understood that sometimes the safest choice is not finding the right signal, but knowing when to stop. When everything was over, the lake returned to its original state: flat, white, silent. There were no traces of what had just happened, no memory preserved on the ice. If someone passed by afterward, they would not see death, only a peaceful winter scene. And it is precisely that calm that makes humans most prone to mistakes. For medieval people, the lesson did not lie in learning how to listen correctly. It lay in accepting that there are things that cannot be controlled, no matter how careful you are. The sound test was not a key to safety, but a reminder that safety is always conditional, always temporary, and can vanish in a single moment of silence. Today, we no longer have to cross frozen lakes the way they did. But dead ice has never disappeared. It has only changed shape. It can be a system that seems solid, a decision everyone follows, a shared belief that feels safe, simply because you are not the only one who believes in it. Like that flat, silent sheet of ice, everything looks fine, until it no longer is. Medieval history does not teach us how to avoid all risk. It reminds us of something far harder to accept. Sometimes, the warning sign is not a loud noise, but its absence. And sometimes, the bravest choice is not taking one more step forward, but turning back when no one else has done so yet. Perhaps that is what gives this story its value even today. Not because the sound test was strange or ancient, but because it reflects a deeply human instinct, the desire to believe that we are in control of the situation, when the truth is that survival sometimes comes from knowing how to acknowledge our own limits. If this story made you reflect, share your thoughts in the comments. In that moment, do you think medieval people should have trusted experience, or trusted their own hesitation? And if you want to continue exploring the darker corners, the quiet survival lessons that history has left behind, subscribe to the channel. Here, we are not looking for beautiful stories, but for stories that help us better understand how humans managed to survive.